Welcome to Custom Rod Building. I'm Doc Ski. I've been building rods for over 20 years now. Today we're going to take the time to walk you through building your own custom rod. It's a lot of fun to do, and it's real satisfying to go out and catch fish on your own piece of equipment. The first thing that you have to do is you have to pick your blank and your components to make the fishing rod. And it depends on what you're going to do. It's kind of like a golfer. A golfer has a putter for putting on the putting green. He has a driver for driving off the tee. He has wedges and everything else. In fishing, we have fishing rods to meet every purpose. We have live bait sticks, we have heavy tuna rods, we have long jig sticks. The first thing you need to do is decide what you're going to use it for. Then you got to pick out your components. We've already picked out some components today. We're going to be working on a tuna stick. And the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set a stopping point for the rear grip when we slide it into place. And I'll show you how that's done. This rod's not going to be cut at all. We're going to use it full length. So I'm going to put the gimbal on the end of the blank, and we'll go ahead and score the blank so that we know where to put the tape. Again, we're going to use the 1/4-inch tape just a little bit below the mark we made. Build that tape up good and high. Okay, and that's fine for when you have a gimbal, but not all rods have gimbals. Now I've got a rod here that's already got a butt cap on it, and that's where the stopping point will be for the hypalon on this rod. Happens to be a little bit lighter rod, and the guy that wants it doesn't want a gimbal. Okay, now that we've got that done, next thing we're going to do, we're going to take our stay bond. This is the stuff that I like to use, stay bond. You can get it at any tackle shop. Only I pour it into a coffee can and thin it a little bit with acetone so that it's a little easier to apply. Straight out of the can, it's really, really thick, and it puts way too thick a layer on. All you're trying to accomplish is put a real thin layer of glue on the outside of the blank and on the inside of the hypalon, so that when you reactivate it, after it's dried, and reactivate it with acetone, it just slides right on down the blank. So now we get the rear grip that we're going to be using, and I slide the rear grip down the blank to the point of where it stops. I don't shove it, I just stop where it stops naturally. And I take a grease pencil or something, you don't want to scratch it up here, and I make a mark so that I know that's where I want to start my stay bond. I don't need it above that because it slides easily up to that point. Always put some paper or something down on your table or wherever you're going to be using this, because it's pretty runny stuff. You just want a nice, even coat. You don't want it all caked up in big globs. Just makes it harder to get off later on, and it doesn't give it any better sticking power than a real thin coat. Now you don't have to do this on a set of wheels. You can do this on a cardboard box with 2 V's cut out on either edge of it. Just something to support the rod at 2 points. And I went right up to the tape, because you're going to want to slide that grip all the way to that piece of tape. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the grips, and all I'm using here is a piece of a blank. You could use a dowel, anything round and cylindrical that you can stick down inside the grip. The rear grips, of course, like I said, they're 11/16, so we can use a little bit bigger doweling. On the fore grips, I basically use the tip piece of a fishing rod. So we get some stay bond on the stick here, and you want to, let me move this over here. You want to get this stuff down inside the grip without creating too much of a mess. I let it drip a little bit and then just put it inside the grip, rub it around the grip, and lower it into the grip. Rub it up and down a few times. Put another dab of it in there. And then something that works real well for me is to take and just roll it back and forth to thoroughly give you a thin layer inside the grip. You take it out. I always turn it up to the light and look inside of it to make sure you can see a nice sheen inside. Then I turn the grip around to the other direction. Depending on the length of the grip, since these are only 10 inches, you could almost do this all in one step. But I like to do it a half at a time. And again, put some in. Add a little bit more to the stick. Put it in. And rub it back and forth on the paper. You have to have paper down because it really gets messy. Okay. If you see any dull spots inside, that means that the stay bond didn't get onto that section, and just stick some more in there and make sure you have good coverage all the way through. Then all you got to do is put it off to the side for probably 20 minutes, and by then it'll be dried out enough that we can take them outside and slip them onto the blank. Okay, the rear grips are pretty easy. Now that we've done the rear grips, the foregrip is the same routine, only I'm going to use a much longer, thinner stick. You see the buildup. You see the buildup on this stick here is when you're forcing it into the grip, it just keeps piling up and piling up and piling up. After a while, I'll have to cut this off, but this is just about perfect right now to fit into a 1/2 inch ID inside diameter of Hypalon, and just turn it around and you get excellent coverage this way. If it's too thin, then you have to roll it a lot. And since these are all tuna sticks and they're real long foregrips, most people take a 16-inch or longer foregrip on their tuna sticks because the fighting styles that we use nowadays on tuna and 2-speed reels and all the harnesses that we have, we're allowed now with the gimbal to reach way up the rod and change the lever point on the rod and give the fisherman a little advantage. In the old days, we didn't have gimbals and we didn't have 2-speed reels, and we didn't have harnesses that wrapped around your bottom side. So we pretty much had to do all of our work on big fish with our upper body, and without a gimbal, you end up having to hold your hand real close to the reel seat to stabilize the rod. With the gimbal, we don't have to do that anymore. We can reach straight out and just do a test on yourself with any really heavy stick. Hold it about, hold the foregrip right near the reel seat, have somebody pull on the tip, then have him relax it and reach till your arm is straight out from your body, like 90 degrees from your body, and you'll find out what a phenomenal difference it is on how much pressure you can handle and how hard you can pull. See, I just looked up inside there and there's a couple of real flat spots. A little bit harder to put the stay bond inside the foregrips. Once you've done a few of them, you'll start seeing how easy it is. What you're looking for is a nice even sheen on the inside of the foregrip, any grip for that matter. Okay, like I said, if you make a mess with the stay bond on the hypalon and your hands, take some acetone, put it on a cloth, and get it off real quick. That way you avoid the chance of making a stain or having the glue get stuck right into the grip. It looks like we have good coverage all the way through there. Now when everything dries, we're ready to go out and slide them all into place. I like to take and wipe off the excess off my tools. After it's dried, it'll only take about 20 minutes to dry. Then we can take this out and we'll slide the rear grip into place. And the reason I always put the rear grip on before I do anything else to the rod is that gives me some weight on the end of the rod so that we can spline the rod. It gives a little extra weight on the end of the rod so that we can spline the rod easier, which is the next thing we're going to do after we put the rear grips on. Now that the stay bond's dry on the blank and it's dry inside the grip, we're ready to go ahead and slide it into position and cement it into place. What I'll do is I'll slide it down as far as it'll go and it stops. Then I'll take the acetone, pour it inside the grip, and let it cascade down the rod until the glue kind of takes on a different appearance. When that happens, it's ready to slide. I waste a lot of acetone, but I want to make sure it's good and slippery, and then I just slide it into position. If you keep your hands at the top of the grip, it'll allow the bottom to balloon out and it'll slide down much easier. If you put your hands down here on the bottom of the grip, what you end up doing is squeegeeing the glue off, and you might stop 2 inches short of where you want it to stop, and that generally ends up resulting in a new grip and redoing the whole thing. So save yourself some time and keep your hands right at the top. After I've got it into place, it stopped where I put the tape, and we've already shown you how to put the tape on. Now that it's stopped, I want to clean up the stay bond as much as possible while it's still fairly active. That's why I keep the rag in the box. I'll put a little extra acetone on it and just go ahead and wipe down the rod. The grip may still slide a little bit, but you shouldn't have any problem keeping it in place. Try to get all the glue off of the edge of the hypalon. We're going to have a wind check that goes on there and covers up a little bit of it, but you want to keep it as neat as possible. Also come down to the bottom and get it off of your tape. So you make sure that it's butted right up against that tape. That's where you wanted it to stop. Okay, now that we've got the rear grips on the blank, and the reason I put the rear grips on the blank is it makes it much easier to do the next step. It's called splining the rod. Some people call it finding the backbone of the rod. What it is if you remember when we went to CalStar and Leon showed us how the glass was tacked on the steel mandrel, that has a lot to do with the spline of the rod. It's the place the rod naturally wants to bend to when it's put under pressure. If we don't do that, what you'll end up with is a rod that wants to pull to the side, twist in your hand, and it gives you a lot of hand and forearm fatigue. In the old days, it used to be ultra important because the lamination process wasn't as good as it is now, and the fibers would actually want to untwist and you'd have a lot of breakage. We don't have that problem, but we still have the fatigue problem. So it's real important on a custom-built rod to spline it. This is a handmade splining machine. I made it, or a friend made for me. All it is 2 sets of ball bearing wheels so that the rod can spin naturally. One has a slot so that you can put the tip through, and the other set of wheels just supports the rod. What we do is we slip the rod in and just spin it and let it fall where it naturally wants to fall. There's a little bit of pressure with the weight of that grip on the end of the rod to make it go right to the spline. After it finds the spline, take a piece of tape and I put it on the blank above where the reel seat. This rod's going to have a reel seat and a sleeve for an 80 wide. So I put it above that area, spin it again, and that tape is dead center on the spline. No matter how much I spin the rod, it'll keep wanting to go to that place. And we want to put, this is a conventional rod, the guides are going to be on top, the hood of the reel seat's going to have to be on top, so that's where we want to put our piece of tape. Okay, we'll spin it a few times. We're dead center with the tape, so I'm going to go ahead and mark a little pen mark right in the center of the tape. Make sure that it's still straight down the center of the rod. Now we'll try it on another blank. Again, this is why I like to put the rear grip on, because it gives a little extra weight to the rear end of the rod. We spin it a few times, make sure that it's got a natural lie here. Take a piece of tape, put it on there, spin it again, make sure. Looks like the tape is just little bit left of center. So I'll put a pen mark just left of the center there. Want to get it as close as we can. The closer to the dead center we get, the less torque we're going to get on the whole thing. Now on tuna rods, you pretty much have to have a splining machine or something similar. On a lighter stick, like a bait casting rod that you'd use for anchovy or sardines, you can do it in your hand. We've already got the whole grip assembly on this rod, and this happens to be a spinning rod. Now when I turn this, it just naturally wants to go with the hood down. Remembering that on a spinning rod, we're going to put the guides on the bottom surface here. So the hood of the reel seat has to be facing down. Now I'm not doing this with my hand because we'll put it in the machine and redo it in the machine, and you see that's the dead center of the back of the reel seat. That's the guide to keep the hood of the reel seat straight on this Fuji reel seat. So obviously we've got a spinning reel, spinning rod, and like I said, with the lighter sticks or longer sticks, you can actually do it by hand. You'll feel it when you roll the rod, it just snaps right into place. It always wants to go to the same place. Okay. Now after the splining, we'll go ahead, we'll put the reel seats on it. We'll finish up the foregrip assembly, put the wind check on, and then we'll sit down and talk a little bit about the equipment we're going to need to wrap rods, how we're putting guides on, why we're putting them on, what sizes we want to use, and some of the theory behind that. Okay, now we've got the rear grip on, we've got them splined. We need to put some kind of an adapter or filler against the blank to fit the hood of the reel seat on snugly. I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. There's a lot of ways you can do it. Some people use cork rings, some people use butcher's paper. I just use plain old masking tape because the way I put the reel seats on with epoxy, all I need is the masking tape. So I take my reel seat, I slip it onto the blank right up against the rear grip. Again, just to etch the outer skin of the blank. Slide off the reel seat. Then I take just a piece of a hacksaw blade, anything that can roughen the surface of the blank. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to give myself a good footing for the epoxy to hold to. And I do it all under the section that I marked, right from the hypalon to the end of the mark I made. Then I take the masking tape, put my reel seat back on here. I have to build this up so that there's no play left in this reel seat. You want it to go on real snug. The snugger, the better. Now I only use probably 3 bands of masking tape just to support the reel seat in 3 places. Keep checking it to see that it's nice and snug. That's just a little too snug. So I'll tear off a piece of it. Test it again. And it slides down real nice and easy. At this point, I also want to make sure I've got the center of the hood marked. In this case, it's an AFCO ARS 3MW, and the W stamped right in the middle of the opening of the hood, so I don't have to do anything with this one. But with a plain AFCO 3M, I'd have to put a little tape right in the center of the hood so that I could match it up with my spline tape. So we've got one band. Put a band up here. You'll always need more tape as you go further up the rod because the blank's becoming narrower. Okay, that's pretty snug there. It'll be a little bit slipperier when we put the epoxy on. And I put one more band in the middle. When I apply the epoxy under these reel seats, you'll see why I leave these gaps. Okay, that's good and snug all the way now. I'll do one more because when I mix up my mix up my epoxy, I always like to mix it up enough to do 2 rods at a time. If you tried to do 3, it generally sets up before you can put the reel seats on. Now this is a plain black 3M reel seat, and you'll see we have no notches or anything here. There's no W stamped on it. So I want to take a piece of tape, look at the hood, and find the center of the hood. That way it'll match up again with the spline tape. Okay, again, we're going to have to put 3 bands in here. Depending on the blank, you may have to build it up quite a bit.
Watch your elbow when you check it, too. Drop your elbow down and help.
Okay. That's good and snug. Notice I come back quite a ways from the end of where I marked the reel seat. This is so when I put my epoxy on, when I've got the reel seat in place, I can pour some excess epoxy in the top and have it fill in the top of the reel seat. There are other methods, like I said, there are a lot of different methods for doing grips or reel seats, any of that stuff. But this happens to be the method that's worked really well for me. I've never had reel seats break loose, and it's just extra added insurance, especially nowadays with all the new equipment that we have and the more pressure that we can put on these fish. The more pressure you put on the fish, the more pressure you put on the rest of the equipment too. So we've had to make adaptations all the way along just to keep the gear together. Okay, after we've got this all together, I like to use a slow curing epoxy at least 2 hours to cure. Fast curing epoxy has a tendency to be very brittle and it'll break. So I like to use Flex Coat. It takes about 2 hours to dry up real hard. With that longer setting time like that, I've never had a problem with them breaking loose. I like to use the Flex Coat epoxy because it's a long cure epoxy. It takes about 2 hours to set up. What I use is 10 milliliters of each part. It has to be exact. One's a hardener and one's a resin. Get that up to the 20 mark there. Now I'm probably going to have effectively about 15 to 20 minutes depending on the temperature, and it's pretty hot today so it might set up fast. The hotter it is temperature wise, the quicker this stuff will set up. Some people actually mix it up and then put it in a little jar with cold water in it to give them more working time. But I'm pretty fast at doing this stuff, so we'll just fire from the hip with it. You want to make sure it's mixed really thoroughly. And you can generally tell that it's mixed thoroughly because when it's not, it still looks a little milky. And when it's really mixed good and clean, it'll be really clear looking and shiny. Don't worry much about bubbles here because this is epoxy. When we do the finish, which is from the same company, we'll be a lot more careful about how we do it. Now, I've got it mixed up good. I'm going to have to move this light over here. Okay, what I want to do is I want to put a thin coat on first. Make sure that the blank's covered and the tape's covered. You need to spin it while you're putting it on. I go right up to about where the mark is. Make sure it gets on the tape. Want to make sure it gets in each one of these gaps between the tape and actually has contact with the tape. So effectively what I'm doing is I'm going to fill everything under this reel seat with epoxy directly to the blank. It gets a little messy here too. If you put on too much, you start spinning it off. When I get to this last piece of tape, I don't put it on the blank yet. I just kind of put it on the edge of the tape. That's because when I'm pushing the reel seat down, I'm going to squeegee it off into that section. Okay, so I start the reel seat on, and I just pour a little extra at the end of the first piece of tape and in the gap. And the same thing on the next piece of tape and the gap. And I keep the cup handy and push it on just with my fingers, and the excess will fall off into the cup. And it just fills every section underneath that reel seat. Now when I come off this last piece of tape, I want to make sure that I don't have too much excess, because I just want to slide the reel seat right over the top of the rest of the glue, right down to the grip. Then I'll get up here and make sure that the line I made on my hood with the tape, matches up with that pen mark. And remember, I put that piece of tape a little bit back of the mark for the end of the reel seat. That's so right now I can take the excess epoxy and pour it right down along the edge of the blank and fill the top section of that hood. We want to just get some more of this epoxy in the top edge of that reel seat, and it'll make the whole end of that reel seat full of epoxy, plus the 3 sections that we had inside. And I have never had one of these break loose, ever. Again, we want to get good coverage on the tape, not a lot, just enough to cover it, right up to the line, all the sections that are in between. Basically, what we want to end up with is an addition to the fishing rod itself. Epoxy attaching to epoxy. Start to slide the reel seat down. Now this is starting to set up pretty quick now, so I'm going to have to turn it up. Lay a little bit more in the gap. It's really a hot day today. Slide it on in. Each section kind of squeegees that epoxy off into the open spot. You keep turning it so that it just doesn't drip off of one side. And this should just about go right up to the grip without having too much excess. A little bit of excess there. So right away, take my acetone, run it right up against the reel seat, clean it off. You want to do this before you actually set it on the spline. Okay, got the excess epoxy off. And on this hood, we have the W stamped right in the center of the reel seat. So we just twist it till that W lines up with that ink mark on that piece of tape. This is an AFCO 3M W, meaning the wide hole, and the W is stamped in the middle of both pieces of the hood. And we're set right in line with that W now. We're on the spline. Now it's a matter of letting this sit and dry. Put the foregrip on. We'll show you what happens after we put the foregrip on. We're going to put a wind check on it. Then we're going to start talking seriously about the equipment we need, how to set the guides, and get ready to finish up on this fishing rod. Okay, now we got another rod, and again, this rod has a long way to drive this grip. And when you do this, you can't do it slow and you can't do it gently. You want to go full speed all the way. If you stop halfway, I'm guaranteeing you're going to have a big gap between your grip and that reel seat. So you get this stuff liquid again. Sometimes I pour a little extra inside the grip, lift it a little bit, and then drive it. And right near the end there, it got real tough to push. Now there are some ways to help that. You can take your grip after you've got your stave on dry. You can take it, and if the lady of the house will let you use a nice big pan, boil some water, put the grip in there, what it'll do is it'll make the cells of the hypalon a little more pliable, and you can push it a little easier. I don't seem to have too much trouble right now the way I'm doing it, but if I had to go put a grip on a 540 or a 90J or something like that that has a very large diameter, I might have to go to something like that to help slide that grip down. After you've got your grips in place, it's kind of important to check them. Now I'm doing multiple grips today, so I want to check some of the other ones that I've done already and make sure that they haven't creeped up any. If they do that, you still have a few you know, a few minutes that you can play with it and push it down. But if you let it sit too long, it's cemented there forever. When I was talking about the grip creeping up from the reel seat, that's what you end up with. Luckily, this grip is still active and we can still move it around a little bit. So I'll put it into the box, grab the top of the grip again, and push down and twist the bottom. And you see how it slid into place. Then you just kind of form it back and forth to get it back up to the right length. Now we're in the right position. If I'd have let it sit there too much longer, it would have been stuck there permanently, and I'd have had two choices. Leave the gap, which looks terrible, or cut it off and start again. Okay, after you've got most of the stay bond off and you've got your grips in place, it's a good idea to take a fresh, clean towel. This one's been used to get the bulk of the stay bond glue off. Take a fresh, clean towel, go over your grips, go over the reel seat and the blanket itself to get there's a slight film on here. I don't know if we can pick it up on film, but there's a slight film on here still. And you can see it on the reel seat how it makes it look hazy. So take a fresh, clean white cloth, clean all that stuff off before you take it in to start your wrapping. Got a nice clean towel here. Get that blank nice and shiny again like it was when we started, and you can see that just a little bit of glue was still left on there. And the reel seat ends up nice and chrome shiny. We're ready to fly. Make sure there's no spots on the grip. Black it's pretty hard to see on. The green, blue, and red is much easier. Also roll your knurling nuts up on your reel seat hood. You might notice on this reel seat that it's on backwards. It's on backwards on purpose. The person that I'm building this rod for is a marlin caster, and he doesn't like the feel of the threads right down here where he'd be holding his reel. So he always asks me to put his reel seats on backwards. It's a real popular way for the salmon fishermen and the people up north. A lot of them like to have their reel seats this way. Okay, one specialty item that we might want to put into a handle assembly is called a sleeve. And it's used on tuna rods that are going to use an 80 wide international or a Shimano 80 wides, Penn 9.0s, and it's that front bridle that hangs off the front of the fishing reel. Now if we didn't have a sleeve here, that'd have to clamp right around the hypalon, and it compresses the hypalon and takes it out of shape. We don't want to do that. So we're going to use this sleeve to protect the rod and the hypalon. You slide it up, take your 1/4 inch tape, and you build it up just like you did with the reel seat. You're going to have to build it up a long way. Now this is a 3M reel seat, and I like to use a 4M sleeve with a 3M reel seat so that it comes off nice and smooth. Other people might use smaller ones, but I like that smooth effect. Check it to make sure. Got a little bit further to go. Okay. That's good and snug there. And I only put it on the bottom edge. The reason being, that leaves the whole top open, and we can just mix up a batch of epoxy, pour it right in the top, and let it just settle at its own pace. Then after that, you put the foregrip on ahead of that. That way you don't have that compression from that front bridle on the bigger reels. Okay, another type of handle here in California that's real popular is called a deckhand style. And it's done with cork tape spiraled up the rod. There's no reel seat or anything on it. But most reels that you buy nowadays have clamps on them. And if they don't have clamps, a lot of companies make clamps that can be clamped right onto the cork tape. It's real popular, especially with the local pros, we call them. And one of the modifications that I like to do, I learned at a local tackle shop. Eric Huff, the manager out there, likes to take and put a piece of butt cord right in between each spiral of the cork tape. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that now on this 90J. First thing you want to do is determine how long you want your grip to be. This is a 90J. It's a long rod, and a lot of people like the handle to be just a little bit longer, 32, 34, 36 inches long. I'm going to make this one 36 inches long. The reason they like to make them a little bit longer is because the length of the rod is 9 foot long, and if you have a short handle, it's harder to turn it in your hand and get any distance on your cast. If you allow yourself a little more grip, you can rotate it a little bit better in your hand. I'm just going to etch it right here. I think I'm going to etch it at 34 inches. Okay, you take your cork tape. It comes in a roll. You can buy that at any one of your tackle shops. And you have to cut it at an angle. Now, I'm just going to guess first. You want to cut it at an angle so that it'll wrap flat with the end of the rod. And I'll come up here to the end of the rod, and I'll just wrap it with the backing still on it around to see how close it comes. Just a little bit too far, so I've got to get a greater angle. Okay, that's just about right. It'll be different for different rods. A 90J, a 100J, 100J is much bigger around at the butt, so the angle of this is going to be much slighter. With this rod, this is just about right. Now, since I'm going to do it with this modified style here, let me get this cord undone. What we're going to do is we're going to leave a little gap in between each spiral of the cork tape. Start right at the butt of the rod, wrap it around, and I'm leaving about 1/8 of an inch distance between each wrap, because I know I'm going to put 2 pieces of butt cord in between there. So you just helically wrap it up like a barber pole. Right up the blank. You don't want to pull too much of the backing off at a time. If you do, you end up sticking to the table and your leg and the machine and everything else. Yeah, I'm putting a lot of pressure on it because I want the tape to lay real flat. If I let an air bubble get underneath this tape, then eventually it'll keep compressing and expanding till it breaks right through the cork. Then I'll have to rewrap the whole thing in a couple of weeks. If I do this right and get all the air out, unless I rub it on the rail, it'll probably last the whole season, maybe even 2. We're going to try to keep this nice and tight so we can keep the air bubbles out from underneath the adhesive on the backing here of the tape. If we let that air get under there, it makes it too easy to decay on us and pop through. That means we'll be rewrapping it too soon. Now you could go 1 or 3 strands of cord in between, depending on how big you make the gap. And it doesn't have to be 100% perfect, because you can put more or less tension on the cord when you're laying it in later on. to allow it to fill in. A lot of this just becomes guesswork depending on the size cord you're using. Let's see where my mark is up here. The reason we're putting a lot of tension on this is because we want to get that adhesive nice and flat to the blank. Want to try to keep that gap as consistent as possible depending on how many pieces of cord you want to put in between the spiral. Eric likes to use real big pieces of cord, and he generally uses 2 strands of it, and I like to use a little bit narrower cord. Now I've gone past my mark, so I'm just going to cut it flush for right now. Since this is a fairly large diameter blank, I really only need to use 1 layer of tape. If it were a smaller diameter blank, you might want to put 1 layer of tape on touching itself, and then this layer on for the cord part. Okay, now we'll come down here, grab a couple of pieces of cord, now we come down to the butt of the rod, lay our 2 pieces of cord in, just enough to get them started, and anchor everything with a 1/4 inch piece of tape. All you need to go is around it once, and then you just start laying it in. Now it's pretty narrow down here, so we're going to want to put a little pressure, get it started good. Put a little pressure on them to get them to lay in good and flat. And that really dresses this thing up. Eric's probably going to be upset that I'm giving away his trade secrets, but so many people have liked what this does to a rod that it's becoming real popular now. Now see, we've got a little gap. I don't know if you can see it, but the gap's getting a little wider here, so I'm going to put a little less tension on and let the cord stay a little fatter. We're going to get too fat here. Okay, now we're going to finish up here, get right to the end of the cork, take your 1/4 inch tape and make it nice and straight around the blank. Cut off your cord, then take a real sharp knife and just follow the edge of that tape. Ooh, broke off. Thought we had cut that. Let me try this again here. I thought I'd cut through that cork, but it doesn't look like it went all the way through. Here we go. And this is just the adhesive backing off the tape. Okay, got it all cleaned up. Now that we've got our cork tape spiraled onto the rod, we have to have some way of securing it. I've already told you we could do a Turk's head, but we're going to do this with shrink tube. Shrink tubes, electrical tubing, you can buy at any electrical shop. It comes in different inside diameters. And basically what it does is you put it on loosely on the rod, then you hit it with heat. You can either use a stove, a propane torch, alcohol lamp. I'm going to use a butane lighter here. What I like to do is like to get about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of the wrap underneath the shrink tube and then leave some excess out. We'll trim some of that off later. And what you want to do is slowly rotate the rod while you're heating it, and you can see the shrink tube starting to shrink down to conform to the cork tape. You can actually see the spiral marks underneath it. You don't want to hit one spot too long. If you do, what you'll end up doing is burning right through the shrink tube. And you just run it right on out to the end. And it forms right down to the blank. It's a real nice, clean way to finish off a cork tape wrap. You could also use shrink tubes for the area, to protect the area that you're going to mount your reel. Now there's a lot of question about what distance you should put your reel at on a cork tape rod or even with Hypalon grips. The rule of thumb for most rods, for bait casting rods, lighter rods, is to take the end of the rod, the butt of the rod, and put it flush with your elbow. And then where your thumb is actually where the spool of the reel will be. So that would be your assembly. What you'd want to do is put either shrink tube or electrical tape right in this area so that you have a place to mount the reel without tearing up the cork. This happens to be a 9-foot jig stick. And with this length of rod, 9-foot and 10-foot rods, I like to move it back another hand's distance, which will allow me a little bit better rotation on the rod when I cast the lures. With that much length out there, I want to have just a little bit more on the end. Might be a little less comfortable when I'm fishing, I'm landing the fish and winding on the reel, but it'll be a lot easier to cast because that distance out there is pretty hard to handle when you're up tight like this. Okay, now we're ready for the last part of the handle assembly, putting a wind check on. Whenever you use Hypalon, you have to use a wind check to give it a nice smooth transition from the Hypalon into your wrapping. So we're going to use a 9/16 wind check on this, I believe this is a 610H CalStar. And the way you pick your wind check is you want it to stop 5 to 6 inches from the end of the Hypalon. If it slid right down and just barely snugged at the end, on a hot day, this stuff expands and it'll end up riding up over your wrapping. So you want it to stop about 5 or 6 inches up and then just push it down right up against the Hypalon. Then I like to take some round instrument, and this happens to be my burnishing tool, an old dental instrument, and I just rub it at an angle so that it gets nice and flat. Because remember, you're going to want your thread to butt up right against that. Get it as close as possible. And we'll take another one. This looks like it's about the same size, 11/16. Okay, now this one came a little closer, but it's still far enough. If it would have come down to about here, I would have went down one more size. If it would have been maybe 1 inch above the grip, I'd want to go down one more size just so I could squeeze it down. But this is far enough up now. Make sure it's pressed up there good and tight and good and straight. If you spin it fast, you'll be able to see a good straight line. Now we're done with the handle assembly. What's left from here on out is figuring out what color threads we're going to use, what kind of rod guides we're going to use on the rod. Of course, a lot of that has to do with what the purpose of the rod is. Then we'll talk some about the equipment that you need to wrap a rod. You don't have to get all fancy with a nice lathe like I have, but you can make your own set of wheels to build your fishing rod. So we'll get into that here, get this table cleaned up, and show you how all that's done. Okay, now we're ready to set the tip on the rod. The tip's going to be on the spline because we've already got the reel seat on the spline. We're going to take this frame. You don't have to use a frame. You can use your reel or anything else that will clamp into the reel seat. The reason I'm doing this is it'll help me set that tip while I'm working at that end, because it's going to keep the rod laying down like this. Okay, since this is a CalStar 665, I know it takes a number 10 top, and we're going to use a number 10 Mildrum top. This is, the top needs to fit right onto the blank, not too snugly, nice and loose like this. If it's too snug, you have to skin the edge of the blank off to slip the top on. So I make them just a little bit loose, and I can use more glue to keep it on that way. Then I use a heat-sensitive glue. This glue is made by Gudbrand, but there's several other companies that make it, and it's heat-sensitive, obviously. We're going to take the lighter to it, and it starts turning liquid. And then just roll some of it onto the blank. Start setting up right away. Then what I do is I take the lighter and I start heating the tip top first. Don't get it too hot, you'll end up burning your fingers. And then you want to hit the glue and the tip top at the same time till it starts to form a drop, and it goes right into the tip top. And then you slip it right on. I spin it so that the glue don't drip all over the place. It did a little bit there. Okay, since the reel's holding it straight up and down, I can line up that tip and make sure it's nice and straight. Now, it doesn't take very long, probably a minute or two, and that glue will form up and hold that tip top on there. And this is really a good thing to learn just for even keeping your other rods on repair. If the tip breaks loose, most tips that are put on rods, especially custom-built rods, are all put on with heat-sensitive glue. All you have to do is hit them with the lighter, take them off, buy another tip that fits it, and you're right back into fishing again. It's a very simple thing that you can do everywhere you go. In fact, I carry them in my tackle box all the time. While the tip's starting to set up now, I'm going to go ahead and take the reel frame out of the reel seat and just make sure that it lines up with the hood, that the tip is absolutely in the center of that hood. If we line that up and then use that as a guidepost for all our guides, we'll have less and less realigning to do when we're wrapping our guides. Real easy to clean the stuff off the end of the tip. Just scrape it off with your fingernail and it'll break right off. One of the most important things we can do before we actually wrap the guides on is we've got to grind the top of the foot of the guide down so that we can have a smooth transition of the thread from the blank up onto the guide. There's nothing wrong with the bottom of the guide. It sits fine on the rod. But we want to grind the top so that we have a nice smooth transition for the thread. These happen to be Perfection stainless steel guides, WCGHs, and I'm going to be putting those on one of my buddy's marlin casting rods. Want to make it nice and smooth. You don't want to put too much pressure on because you can cut right through the foot of the guide, but you want it to be smooth. I'm going to do a couple of roller guides too. This is a Bigfoot guide that we're going to put on a tuna stick, and if you'll see on the edge of the foot of the guide, it kind of bulbs out. We want to take that off first. Make it nice and straight. Then we're going to round it just like we did the other guide. The smoother we make this, the easier it'll be to wrap the thread right up onto the foot of the guide. Another thing we're going to want to do after we've ground it like this, and you see how it tapers out to a feather end, we want to make sure we take off the roughness on the edge with a piece of sandpaper or a wire wheel. Be real careful when you're doing this that you don't go right through the foot of the guide. And it's real important to be safety conscious. You're working with a wheel here and there's little flecks of metal coming off. And you don't want them getting in your eyes. I always wear glasses or safety goggles. Keeps you from losing your eyesight. You can see we're doing nothing to the bottom of the guide. The bottom of the guide's still rounded to fit the contour of the rod. We're just doing it to the top of the guide. After we get all these guides done, we're going to go inside. We're going to show you how to wrap the guides onto the fishing rod and seat them in place so that they won't move. Now it's time to put the guides on the rod. There's a lot of conflict among rod builders how you should do this. Well, what we got to figure out is what are we trying to accomplish. We want to get the line off the reel, out the tip of the rod to the fish, and utilize the rod to its fullest extent. What I like to try to accomplish is I don't want the line ever to touch the rod. If you've ever had a piece of monofilament in your hand and had it slip through your fingers, you know it's going to cut you. It'll cut right into this fiberglass too. So that's one thing that we want to make sure doesn't happen, especially with a conventional rod where the guides are mounted on the top of the rod. So we need to keep the guides close enough that the line never touches the rod. And we want to put enough guides on the rod so that the whole rod is being utilized to fight the fish. If they're too far apart, even if they don't touch the rod, you're not utilizing the whole rod. So you want the whole rod to be working for you. I don't have a real formula because each blank is different. Depends on who cut the glass, how it was cut, how hot it was that day. There's 1,000 human factors that come into building the blank, and you saw us doing that. Now, what I like to do is I start off with a mark 3 3/4 inches from the tip. I'm going to make my mark on the back of the rod. You'll notice the tip's facing down. The reason is when I wrap, I want all my tucks and all my imperfections to be on the back of the rod. So I'm going to mark 3 3/4 inches. The next guide, I'm going to go 1/4 inch further, which would make it 4 inches. The next guide, I'm going to go 1 more 1/4 inch, which makes it 4 1/4. Now each rod's different, like I said. A bait casting rod, which is real light tipped, you may have to go 1 more, just 1/4 of an inch away from the other one. But this is a fairly stiff rod, so we're going to be able to start stretching those guides out just a little bit more now. So our last mark was 4 1/4. So I'm going to add a half this time. That'll make it 4 3/4. Now the next one, I'm going to add 3/4. So that'll make it 5 1/2. The next one, I'm going to make 1 inch. That makes it 6 1/2. And the last guide, the rule of thumb for a conventional rod is to have the stripper guide, or the guide that's closest to the reel, somewhere between 21 and 27 inches away from the center of the reel seat. So we're going to see how this works out. We had an inch this time and it was 6.5. Let's try 2 inches. That's 6.5, 7.5, 8.5. And check that to the center of the reel seat. And I've got 24 inches to the center of the reel seat, so I'm pretty happy with that. Now what we need to do, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guides. I'm going to be using a fixed stainless steel guide on this rod. This happens to be a Perfection WCGH, high framed, and I'm going to need 7 of them. There's 4, 7. Just happen to have 7 out there. Now what I want to do, just for now, we need to check and see if these marks are right. So I'm going to tape the whole set of guides just with 1/4-inch tape again. I should buy stock and 1/4-inch tape. Probably the single most important piece of destructible equipment we use in rod building. I'm going to tape all these guides on here. I like to start off with as big a guide as possible at the stripper. The reason being, your reel's mounted back here and the spool's about this big around. The line's got to come off the top of that spool into this guide. Now if it's a real small guide, that means that line's got to come way down, make an angle, and then go out the rod. If you make it a bigger guide, it has less of a change of direction, so you should get better casting that way. And I got taught a serious lesson by one of my customers here recently. I've been building rods for a lot of years, and he ordered a 10-foot jig stick. And I would normally use the same type of guide that I'm putting on this rod right now. And up until recently, these were considered really big guides. Well, this gentleman from Las Vegas heard my theory, and he said, well, if that theory holds true about big guides and high frames, why don't you put spinning guides on my rod? And I said, well, you know, that's a bait casting rod. You don't want to put spinning guides on there. And he said, well, how about a Fuji BNLG, which can be a spinning or a bait casting guide? And I said, well, what size do you want me to start with? And he said, a size 40. Well, we're starting with a 24 ring here. You could imagine how big a 40 is. So he talked me into doing it, and I took it out and tested it against my 100J, built this way, and his casted consistently 20% further. And it doesn't look too bad on that rod. It would look really funny on this rod to have a 40 guide on it, but that's what happens with the high frame and the bigger ring. It has a freer flow, and you can throw it at greater distance. Also depends on how much abuse you want to take from your fishing buddies if you want to put spinning guides on your rod. Something that you may notice, I just happened to notice it when I was doing this. When you use 2 guides that are the same size, these 2 guides are the same size, and you run into an optical illusion that the guide that's furthest out looks bigger than this one. Then you switch them, and they still look like this one's bigger. But that's all an optical illusion. These guides are all fairly big guides because this is a very special rod. It's called a Marlin casting rod, and the big rings are made so that the Albright knot can go through the ring of the guides. Okay, now I've got the guides taped on. And I'm going to use a big piece of cord to help us see if these are taped in the right place. I don't want to put a lot of pressure on the guides because they're just taped on there. But what I want to do is put tension on the rod. I've got it butt up against my counter here, and then I want to bend the rod and not put a lot of pressure on the guides because it's still loose. You can see that the line doesn't touch the rod anywhere, and there's a good transition of pressure from each guide all the way up. There's no real big flat spots where the line just gets flat and comes close to touching the rod. So this is a real good setup. You'll also notice that when I'm pulling on this rod, I'm only pulling on the tip end here, and I'm not bending it with my thumb. If you bend it with your thumb, you could snap that tip right off. So when you're checking them, keep your head back from it, because if you let go, you'll get smacked in the chops. And you just want to make sure you have that good transition. This is a good set of guides. Now I can mark it. Okay, the way I mark the guides is I like to take a compass, and I use about 11 or 12 millimeters gap to mark from the tip of the foot of the guide to just lightly scratch the rod. That's going to be one end of the wrap. Then I scratch the other end. Remove the guide. And then the grease pencil mark I made, I scratch it a couple of times. That's where I'm going to put my inlay or some kind of fancy thing that helps me center the guide. I'll center the ring right over that spot when I wrap it on here. Now you can see why I tape the guides on the back, because I'm making the marks back here, the tips face down, and I'm going to make all my marks on the back of the rod. When I wrap it, I'm going to make all the tucks, or what we call whipping, to each wrap on the back of the rod, because when the guy's fishing with it, he's fishing with it with the guides up, and everything looks clean and smooth and perfect on the top. They don't pick the rod up and look at the back of it. They pick it up and look at it like this with the guides up. So we make all the marks, all the tucks, all the mistakes on the back. We do this for each guide. I'll just mark all the feet first. And again, this represents where I'm going to start and finish each under wrap for each guide. Most saltwater rods have 3 wraps, 1 under wrap and 2 wraps over the foot of the guide to hold it. The purpose of the under wrap is to give kind of a platform, a soft platform for the guide to sink into so it can't twist off. You can see how easy it is to move the guide on a hard surface. So we put a layer of thread under it to give it a good cushion. Again, I'm marking the center, and I'll show you how to do a really simple inlay. Using that center mark to help you put the guide back on later on. Okay, you probably didn't think we'd ever get here, but it's finally time to start doing some wrapping. Now, you can go from the most expensive outfit to the least expensive outfit. I started out with rod building with a couple of cardboard boxes with V's cut in them. And just for the purposes of this tape, I'm going to show you a little evolution in rod building. This is how I started out. I just took a cardboard box and I cut a V in it. Try not to cut my finger off while I'm doing this. And I know a lot of other rod builders that have done this. A lot of guys that sit in their rocking chair with the two arms of the chair and use that to support the rod. Now take these wheels out, support the reel seat on one, and we'll support the rest of the rod on the other one. And we're going to wrap a guide this way just to show you it can be done. The device that you use for tensioning your thread, I'm not going to do the first step. The first step is to take your thread and run it through a couple of layers of books. Open a big fat book, just run your red thread right through it. To get more tension, you just put more books on the pile. This is a thread tensioning device that comes off of a sewing machine, and you can tighten it or loosen it depending on what size thread and how tight you want to wrap. So we're going to start off with this. If I can get the thread undone here. The thread goes into that tensioning device through this spring and then out a tip. This happens to be a thread, so with my big hammy hands it's a little hard to work with. Okay. I happen to like to wrap with a lot of tension. Okay, we've got good tension on there. And here's our marks that we made just a little while ago. So we're going to start the thread there. What you want to do, we made the marks on the back, so we're going to put our tuck on the back. Okay, we've got our mark. We're going to get just outside that mark. And you notice how I took the thread and I just hooked it over the top of itself. Put my finger on there and get it anchored good and tight. See how it's anchored there? Make sure it's good and tight. Take a good sharp pair of scissors, cut it off, and then you can just wrap it as tight as possible right next to each other. Now this is a little tedious because of the box type situation, but you can see it can be done this way. And if you wrap over the top of it, you can always back it off a little bit. It's a good thing I'm doing a small guide this way, because doing the whole rod like this, I can remember how many days it used to take me to wrap a fishing rod. What we want to do, we want to wrap right up to that next mark. See, I went over the top of myself there. Now the total investment in this rod wrapping operation is whatever those two cardboard boxes cost. getting pretty close. You can see one little gap. I'll show you how to get around that. When I get about 1/8 of an inch away from that mark, I'm going to stop right about there. Now on this rod, I'm going to use a black and a yellow thread to inlay. Now this particular customer likes to have his inlays hidden underneath the guide that's going to sit there. So we're just going to put this under there. Just put it underneath. Wrap over the top of it all. Get started here. That's why I have these big eyes. Okay, that's anchored good and tight. This is what I call an inlay. Some guys call them spirals, some guys call them pinstripes. I call them inlays. And what you want to do is you want to get the red thread over the top of those two, and then wrap all 3 threads at the same time. And you end up with a black, a yellow, a red, and then let it come out. Okay, now that we've got that wrapped over a little bit to anchor it, just trim it off, get it out of my way, and finish wrapping out to the next mark again. I'm glad I don't have to do it this way anymore. Okay, now we're getting pretty close to the end. That second mark is right there. Here's where the magic comes in. Everybody goes, well, how did you finish that off? Well, this is called whipping. Boy Scouts learn it. And again, I'm doing it where the marks are, which is on the back of the rod, so all the imperfections will be hidden. And I wrap over that loop. I put this little ball on there because it's easier for me to grab. Okay, we've wrapped over the loop far enough to cover that mark. Then I take my scissors, get the line a little slack, stick it in through that loop, grab that ball, and tuck it right underneath. Now it's all tucked in. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can trim this excess thread. The first thing I like to do before I trim it is I like to take some type of burnishing tool. I made my own. This is made out of a dental instrument. I just took the cups off of it, and then it's nice and smooth, stainless steel. It's got a little crook in it so it holds onto the rod pretty well. And I use that to burnish those threads. This is called burnishing. Burnish those threads that are just slightly separated, like here. Can you see that, Mike? Mm-hmm. They're just slightly separated. You kind of push them all together. Always work from each end towards the center. And I use my nail to just make it nice and flat so you don't see that tuck mark. Okay. Now I personally like to use a pair of side cutters or dikes, whatever you want to call them, wire cutters. But I like the ones that are flat on the back. And because they're flat on the back, I can run it right in close to the wrap, lay it right on the wrap, and cut off those two threads. Now you can see a little bit there, but if you take your burnishing tool and rub it, what you've done is push the red threads over the top of it, and it's hidden. The other thing that's real popular for trimming threads is a razor blade or a real sharp knife. We'll try this knife. I'll move it up here. Just lay the knife flat and trim it off. Razor blade works real well, or a nice sharp knife. This is kind of overkill, but it was sharp enough. And again, take your burnishing tool. Just make sure you get rid of those little imperfections. It depends on how perfect you want it to look. Now that's done on a couple of 50-cent cardboard boxes. And when we do it on the $300 lathe, it's not going to look a whole lot different. Not a whole lot different. It'll just be a lot quicker. Okay, now we're going to go to the way I ran my business for several years. And I've been in the rod building business professionally now for about 10 years. And this is what I did for the first 5 years. I took a couple of real heavy steel plates, some angle iron, ball bearings, cut out a couple of wheels made out of wood, put the ball bearings inside of them, put a bolt through them, so we have nice spinning wheels. Now if you're going to make 300 rods a year, this won't work. But if you're going to do all your family rods, you're going to have your son building rods for you or your daughter building rods for you, this is a nice little piece of equipment. You can see how much faster this thing spins. Okay, now we've switched to the wheels, and you don't have to use my design, but any type of rollers that will support the rod. Again, you get it started, put your finger on it to make sure it doesn't slip. Generally it takes about 3 or 4 turns. Trim off that little end, and then you can just start rolling away. See, this is considerably faster. You can actually start going like this. Oops. Back it up a little bit. Out here on the tip, I basically have to do it this way. But further on down the rod, I could just let the thread sit there and put hands on either side of the wrap and go to it. Now we're at our center mark, getting ready to put our inlay in. Now like I said, on this particular man's rods, he likes to have the inlays underneath his guide. And again, here on this one, you see the black was first and then the yellow. So we're going to make sure it's that way on this guide. Put it right in the center on the top. Wrap over it to anchor it. And that's about where we're going to end up. Uncoil it from around the rod here. Okay, the trick is to get the red thread on the outside of that yellow. Okay, then you wrap it around, pull that red thread back close, Then you've got a black, yellow, red, black, yellow, red. So I've got 2, 3, 4. Trim it. It'll wrap right over the end and hide that end. Wrap right on down to the next mark. Getting pretty close. Got to slide the whole thing down a little bit because I'm inhibited by the reel seat down there. Okay. Now the tucks for the under wrap go on the back of the rod. You want to get it centered right down the back line of the rod. Go over your mark. Hold it with your finger in place. Trim the thread. Drop it through the loop. Pull the loop underneath the wrap. Snug it up a little bit. Take your burnishing tool. Work from both ends towards the center. The tighter you make this under wrap, the closer the threads are together, the easier the first over wrap will be. Take my flat cutters, trim that off as close as possible. Trim the other one off. Burnish the thread over the ends. Make sure these tucks are nice and flat. And that guide went a little bit quicker. Now we're getting ready to blaze though. We're going to go to the $300 power wrap. Actually, it's probably about a $50 machine, but it makes your work so much easier, so much tighter, so much more uniform. Just depends on how much you get into it. If you're going to start building 8 or 10 rods a year, it might be worthwhile doing it. And then you re-wrap them every 2 or 3 years. You decide to change color of thread, so it'll pay for itself in time. Okay, now we're ready to do some wrapping on this custom power wrap lathe. It's called the Custom Power Wrap. It's one of the best machines I've ever used, and you'll see how much quicker and easier it goes. Again, it started the same way. Put the thread over the top, get a little ahead of your mark, anchor it down, put your finger on it, get a few wraps to get it started, trim the excess. A little trick I like to use, especially once I get into the rod this section, is I take my burnishing tool and I put it right up against the thread. Not a whole lot of motion this way, pressured this way, just enough to keep the thread close. Get it going, and just follow the thread onto the mark. As you can see, it's slightly faster than the other two methods. There's our mark. Put the inlay, again the black is first. Put the inlay right on the top center of the rod, right through the tip of the rod here. Want to wrap right up to that little etched mark I made. After you get used to it, you learn that you can just push down on the two threads that are the inlay and pull up on the red one with your thumbnail, and it flips right over to the other side. All this stuff becomes really second nature after you've done 2 or 3 guides. You start getting a system going. No matter what you're using, whether it be a machine or rollers or sitting in the rocking chair arms. Okay, you want to come out at a little angle so it's a nice smooth transition. Trim off the excess. Now I don't use the burnishing tool until I get over the edge of that thread. Then I put it up against there. By doing it this way, I save myself a little extra burnishing at the end. Get close to the mark. Put the loop in. This happens to be A thread, which is the smallest size thread you can use. Back in the old days, they used to have O and double O thread, but A is the smallest we have right now. And it happens to be A plain. All threads that you wrap with come in by a color number. This happens to be 326. They come in various sizes. This happens to be A, and they have D and E in this plain thread. This has no color preserver in it. Color preserver thread comes in a standard size C, which is actually the same. A size C NCP thread, which means color preserver in it, is the same as a size D plain thread, because when the factory puts the color preserver in the thread, it actually makes it one size larger. It's a good thing to remember when you come to weaving and putting one layer of thread on another. You can put D on top of A, but try to put A on top of D. It just won't happen. Now, you may not be able to pick it up on the tape, but I have these visors on, and I can see how much more uniform this wrap is than this one or the first one that we did. It's much tighter, much more uniform, has a solid sheen or glaze to it. So I know that's wrapped really tight. We'll do one more guide, then I'm going to show you about putting the color preserver on. Now, color preserver does 2 things. It preserves the color of the thread, and it also shrinks and tightens the thread a little bit. And NCP thread, you don't have to use color preserver, but I personally use color preserver on everything. Plain, NCP, the whole bunch. And I probably use a lot more color preserver than most rod wrappers. You don't notice it once I put my finish on, but I actually have 5 layers of color preserver on all my wraps. I use a lot of plain thread, so I like to use a lot of extra color preserver for it, but I've found that the more color preserver I use makes my finish work a lot easier. If you put it on too thick though, or if you don't smooth it out good enough, you'll end up with blemishes on your wraps. But I'll show you how to do all the color preserver work in just a second. We've got our inlays. Try to come off the thread at an angle so that it keeps the red thread nice and straight. Trim it off. We went right back over it there.
So you just back it off?
Just back it off. Get back to where it's good and solid again. Get a better line on it. Actually, with this machine, you can take your hands off the tensioner. But I usually like to push the carriage along by hand. The loop, I haven't even said anything about that loop. Loops can be made out of rod wrapping thread, can be made out of small diameter monofilament. I've seen people use wire from time to time, but just recently I came onto this material, and it's actually a fishing line put out by Line. It's called Spectra, and it has super abrasion qualities. Normally, if you make a loop out of monofilament or thread, even wire, after a couple of rods, sometimes only 10 or 15 guides, the loop will break because you're pulling this nylon thread, which is twisted, through a loop, and it kind of like cuts a groove in it each time you tuck it underneath. So all those other things, it just seems to cut right through. But the Spectra, I've been using the same loop now, probably 5 months. And it's still a good loop. So it depends on what you want to use. I imagine dental floss would be pretty good, but I found this loop made out of Spectra is just fantastic. And I haven't had to change it yet. Also, if you'll see on the loop here, you see how it's flattened out here on the edges? Makes it a lot easier to pull underneath the threads. Whereas using size E thread or mono, it stays round, and when you tuck it under, it kind of leaves a little lump. This allows it to lay flatter. Okay, now I'm going to take and put some color preserver on it. Like I said, with plain thread, you have to use color preserver. With NCP, you don't have to, but I recommend you use it no matter what. You don't have to use as much as I do, but I've found that 5 coats doesn't hurt anything, and I've always been complimented on how clean the wraps are, so it doesn't milk it unless you leave it on too thick. So this is Flex Coat Color Preserver. It actually looks like Elmer's white glue. In fact, it may be, I don't know. It looks very similar to it, has many of the same qualities. When it dries clear. There's some of it that's dried on the edge of the bottle. And when you put it on thin, it dries absolutely clear. It takes about, I'd say 45 minutes to dry out real well. And I just go off the edge of the thread, a little bit like that. Bring it all the way down. With raw thread, with plain thread, which is what I'm using here, I go through once. I go through all the guides. Again, these are just the under wraps. This kind of forms a good footing for that guide so it won't slide on the hard blank. See, it looks milky on the thread right now, but it'll dry absolutely clear. Now I just give it a few seconds to dry up a little bit. Then I'm going to put another real thin coat, and it'll make it real nice and uniform. Then I'll put it up and let it dry for about 45 minutes and be able to put the guides on, the first overwrap on the guides. Another little trick that, this is my own professional little trick, is on this second coat, you can form little bubbles on here. that you really can't see. And I'll be putting this on here, and as soon as I get to the end of the wrap, make sure it's nice and uniform all the way across. Okay, I'll just blow through this tube to get all those minute bubbles out. This tube not only comes in handy when I'm doing the color preserver work, but I also use it when I'm doing the finish work. That's it. Now we'll just sit there and let it dry. We'll put a guide on here pretty soon. Okay, the reason I like to use this system, if you'll take a look at the foot of the guide down here, the super heavy duty foot has a real wide foot to it, which makes a good platform to hold it onto the rod. The heavy duty guide, though it's strong enough, has a very narrow foot and has a tendency to be pulled off to the side of the rod. You don't want that happening right in the middle of a 3-hour battle with a 300-pound tuna. Now we're going to go ahead and wrap these on the rod. This is called the first over wrap. And if you'll remember, when we did our under wraps, we put an inlay right in the middle of the guide, or the under wrap, so that we can put center the guide in the middle of that under wrap. And I like to put it right where the roller is, or in the case of a fixed guide, right where the ring is. Kind of eyeball line it up, and then hold it on with a piece of 1/4-inch tape. That's just to temporarily hold it in position. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and start wrapping. Just like we did the under wrap, go over the rod, get it down near the end, hook it over the top, get a few turns on to hold it in place. Trim it. When you get right to the end of the foot of the guide, you want to slow down. Make sure you have a good bite on the foot of the guide. Try to keep it as straight as possible. What I'll do sometimes is I'll go part way and then back it up, putting pressure against the threads that have already been laid down to get it on a straighter line. Go right on up the foot. Stop about 1/8 or a little bit bigger of an inch away from the foot. Put in your loop. Tuck it under, just like you were wrapping the under wrap, only now you had to deal with the foot of the guide. Sometimes that causes a little problem because you're going from one diameter, then into where the foot is, you have a lot larger diameter and it builds all the way. But if you've prepared your guide real well, take your time, you can get up it real easy. I like to bevel my guides, as you've seen, a lot. That does two things. Makes my wrapping easier, and I think I have a lot less cracking with my finish right at the foot of the guide, which is one of the biggest problems you run into. You want to try to remove that little tuck spot, so you flatten all the thread that's just in front of it, and then push out on it a little bit. Same on the other end. You want to push that tuck out a little bit. Okay, now we're ready to do the other side of the guide. Take off the 1/4-inch tape. All the wrapping starts the same way. go over the top. After a while, you get a system of just hooking that on there. Now, there's a little gaps there on the end, but we'll get that at the end when we burnish. Now, I happen to be working with roller guides right now, but there's a lot of different guide companies and a lot of different kind of guides that can be used. The most common ones that are used here in California are Perfection stainless steel guides, Fuji, Hardloy guides, and SIC guides. Roller guides, of course, for the tuna and marlin gear. And that's what your local tackle dealer is all about. They have people that are trained, have all the stuff there. You tell them what you want to do, and they can help you pick out a set of guides. You just have to give them the parameters that you're working with. Use their knowledge. They're there to help you. And that's what's good about the independent tackle retailer, is he has the time to give you that one-on-one personal help. Yesterday when I picked up stuff from Wayne and Linda, they took the time to sit there and find all the right parts for me, dig them out, get the right colors. We had it all packaged up. And you can't put a price on that one-on-one contact that they're going to give you. Sometimes you may not know really what you're wanting to do. You just know what kind of fish you're going to fish for or what kind of reel you're going to use. And that gives them a good starting point. They have a variety of blanks that you can choose from. You can sit there and play with them, and they'll help you pull on them. Sometimes they'll even have finished rods that you can see what it feels like with this set of guides or that set of guides on there. And they have just a wealth of information there for you. We'll put one more guide on, and then I'm going to have to move my wheels. It all seems like fairly repetitive work, but it's really a lot of fun to do. It's a super family project. My son has built some of the neatest fishing rods, and him and I go fishing, and of course, he doesn't catch his fish on a dock ski rod. He catches his fish on a James Jr. rod. The pride that he gets out of it is just really fantastic. Okay. Again, remember that you can cut these pieces off with a razor blade or a nice sharp knife. You see how I keep pushing that tuck out? You want to make it as flat as possible so it looks like when you get done with it and you've got color preserver and finish on it, a lot of times it looks like you've just got a band of tape around there. You can't find any seams to it at all. With spinning rods, you notice we're putting all the tucks on the back side of this rod. Now if you're building a spinning rod, your guides are going to be facing down, so you're going to be seeing this surface of thread. You want to put all your tucks on the bottom side of the rod, because that's the way the rod will be held normally. And you want to make it look nice and clean as possible on the top side then. I think when I first started building fishing rods, a rod would take, probably a week to wrap. Taking my time, doing it after work, watching TV and having dinner and stuff like that. So maybe after 2 or 3 weeks of working with a rod, you're ready to go fishing. And there's really no greater thrill than to build a piece of equipment, take it out, and actually have it work. It's kind of like that saying, I love it when a plan comes together. Okay, now we've finished up on the final wrap here. We've got everything taken care of. Now it's time to take the rod out of the lathe, or if you've got wheels, take it off the wheels. Before we put the color preserver on, we want to line these up with line of sight in the opening to the hood of the reel seat. So I'm going to look down the hood of the reel seat here. And before you put the color preserver on, you actually have a little time to turn these guides a little bit to line them up nice and straight. After a while, you almost can do it perfect just from the tip. It looks like we've got this set good and straight. Now all we have left to do is chuck it back up, put some color preserver on it, and when the color preserver is dried from this first overwrap, we'll go ahead and do the final overwrap, the finishing touches on the fishing rod, to make this look like a real dolly piece of equipment. Like I said, most saltwater rods need 3 wraps. 1 under wrap to help hold the foot of the guide, and then 2 over wraps to hold the guide onto the under wrap. Going to be using a deep purple over the top of the black with gold inlays. Walk it down till we got a little bit of the black showing. And on the ends, what I like to do is I put 4 turns on the rod. After you've hooked it up, put 4 turns on the rod, cut off the excess. We're using metallic gold here. Again, conventional rod, we're putting all the tucks on the back. Hold the gold in place. That's 2 threads over the gold, 3 threads over the gold, 4, 5, 6. If you count your threads, you'll have a more uniform look on your finished product. It'll look like everything was lined up absolutely perfect. So we've got 6 turns over the top of the gold, push the purple on the outside of the gold, lay the gold next to the other purple, and you end up with 2 gold threads, a purple thread, 2 gold threads, and a purple thread. Come out of it at an angle so the purple thread stays nice and straight. Put a couple of turns over the top of it to anchor it in place. Now I'm using metallic thread here, and I've got a little trick that I use. Metallic thread is a little harder than the normal nylon thread because of the mylar outer coating. So I take and just push the thread off the edge of that where I cut the tuck so that it makes an easy transition coming off of it. Again, nice and slow up the foot of the guide. Put your loop in. Try to make the amount of black showing on one end the same as the amount of black showing on the other end. Just depends on how much perfection you want to put into your equipment. Okay, we'll get these threads nice and tight. Trim the excess off. Again, push the other threads over the top of it so it lays nice and flat. Start on the other end. Go around the rod. You want to try to make the same amount of black show that you had on the other side. We're not going to mic this out. We just want to eyeball it. We got 4 turns. Trim it. Inlay the gold on the back again. 3, 4, 5, 6 turns. When we get done with this guide, you'll see that the inlays on both ends look the same. The amount of black looks about the same. Gives you a nice uniform looking product. Some rod builders like to make the wrap on the back side of this type of guide. Because of the shape of the guide, some guys like to put it a little bit longer. So this is narrow and short, like the front is short, and then the back slopes off into a longer wrap. That's just a matter of when you do your detailing at the beginning and you etch the rod, you might use 11 or 12 millimeters off the end of the guide on this end and maybe 15 or 20 off the other end. My little trick there of spreading that thread so it's nice and thin and feathered at the end. Walk it right up there. It really only takes about 4 or 5 threads to anchor, but I put a little bit more. It's more frustrating to me to cut it off and redo it if it comes undone. And if you burnish real well, you won't see that anyway. After a while, you see the gap that I have here at this end. I can just take my burnishing tool and rub towards the other threads and it closes it right off. Sometimes if you trim a little too close, when you're trimming those tuck marks, you'll end up with a little fuzz. I don't know if we can pick this up on the camera, but right here there's a little fuzz sticking up. Now, that's no problem, but we can eliminate it real easy by flaming it gently with a lighter, and it gets rid of that. Makes it nice and smooth. Sometimes after I've done all the guides, I'll just go down the whole thing. Doesn't take much because this is nylon and it melts right up. You have to be careful when you've got color preserver on your thread and you're doing your burnishing. The thread we're putting on is raw, but the thread underneath has color preserver on it. And if you rub it, and I'll rub it on a place that the thread's going to go over the top. You see how it has a nice sheen to it right now. If I rub it, you can see how it milks up maybe. And you want to try to avoid that on the ends. If you do that on the ends, then it looks like you've got little bubbles or something that discolors the thread, especially black. 4, 5, 6. There's a book on the market put out by Dale Clemens called Advanced Custom Thread Art. And it's really a good book. It gives a lot of the basics on how to do different things, how to make different pieces of equipment. There's a section in the back about diamond wrapping. And that's a real good book to get to help you if you have any questions. Of course, you can call me, or you can call your local tackle shop and they'll help you out. But it's nice to have that book, especially for making some pieces of equipment. And it has some real technical data in there. I don't use it because I'm not building a spaceship to go to the moon. But for those of you that like to know all the scientific data behind things, there's a lot of good information in there. I like to have it handy because there's some things that crop up from time to time that I just open the book and see if there's any answers in there. A nice little tool to have around. And if you do enough of these, you might design some of your own equipment. I know some guys that do a lot of weaving in Texas that have developed a loom to hold their threads separated and numbered. One day we'll talk about weaving, but it keeps those threads numbered real easy so you can wrap and not get lost. That's all in the decorative part of rod building, but they built their own loom just out of necessity. They saw a need to do something and they ended up making it. It's a really nice product. I'm going to go ahead and put some color preserver on this thread, and then we're going to show you how to put the finish on and talk a little bit about the equipment that needs to be used to put the finish on a fishing rod, especially the kind of finish I like to use. If you'll notice, I'm putting color preserver on everything. Now I'm being real careful underneath this guide because this is a roller guide, and if you get color preserver or finish in between that guide and the frame, it won't roll. So when you're all done with the fishing rod, it's real important to go back and check to make sure all the rollers work. If they don't, you probably got some finish or color preserver in between the wheel and the frame. All you have to do is undo the 2 screws, take the wheel out, clean it up, put it back together. A little grease in there or a little oil. Do that after you're done though, because if you accidentally get any grease or oil on the thread before you put the finish on, you'll never get the finish to attach to the thread. Something you want to do after everything's completed. I like to use 5 coats of color preserver over everything. You don't have to. With NCP thread, you don't have to use any color preserver, but I like to use it all the time, NCP or plain, and put 5 coats on. Again, I'm blowing out any bubbles that I see. If I get them now, it's a whole lot easier to deal with than when I'm trying to put my finish on and I find the bubble. After the thread had dried a little bit there, I want to make sure I get on my first coat of color preserver a nice even coat and fully impregnate that thread. If I don't, with raw thread or plain thread like this, when I put my finish on, the finish will go into the thread and it'll discolor it and darken it. If I put finish onto raw plain thread, it'll actually turn it into black thread. Okay, now we can let the color preserver dry on these, and I'll show you how to put finish on a rod, put it in the rack. I'm going to mix up a light coat of flex coat finish, which is what I use for my first coat. I normally put 2 or 3 coats of finish on the thread. I want to do the light coat because that's the one I use at the beginning. Even though this rod already has several coats of finish on it, I'm going to use the light coat just so you can see how it reacts. I like to use flex coat. It seems to give me the best qualities for clarity and flexibility. This rod's going to bend, and you have a stiff guide on a flexible rod. If you don't have a flexible finish, as soon as that rod bends, right where the metal of the guide goes in contact with the rod, you're going to have this crack where the finish wants to pull apart. If you've got some fishing rods at home, take the time to look at them. You'll see that that crack comes in all the time right at the foot of the guide. The way I've done it seems to work out real well. to avoid that cracking. I have customers, Cal and Nancy Sheets, who do the 2-speed reels on internationals. They've got rods that are 5 years old and they still look brand new. In fact, I used them in a show a couple of times last year. So first I take my part B, which is the catalyst, and what I'm using is just little bitty test tubes. I can't tell you exactly how much goes into this, but you can see it's only about 2 inches long and pretty narrow. It doesn't matter how much, it just matters that it stays consistent. So I've got 2 tubes, one for the hardener, and I just fill the hardener right up to about 1/4 of an inch from the end of the tube. And I'm going to put it out of the way for right now. I'll do the same thing with the resin. The resin's a little thicker, so you have to take your time pouring it. Get about that far from the top. The important part when you're messing with the finish here is that you want to have consistency. You want to have 2 parts as equal as possible. If you get too much hardener in there, what you'll end up with is a real hard finish and it'll crack on you real bad. And it'll also go off too quick. What I mean by going off is the fact that it actually gels so quick that you can't work with it. A little trick I use on the resin is I take this type of an alcohol bottle. This is alcohol flame, and it's got a little spout that comes out. When you squeeze it, you see that little flame shoot out. And I just kind of hit that glass a little bit, and it helps liquefy the resin. Helps me get it all out of the tube. If I have too much left in the tube, when I put the other part in, we'll be out of sync here. Okay? You can use these cups over and over and over when it comes to finish, because you're doing your marking and you're measuring in the glass tubes. And you should use glass tubes when you put your color preserver in for measuring. It's a lot easier to get, not color preserver, finish. It's a lot easier to get the liquid out. Now I've got the 2 parts in there, and I have a brush that I just keep sitting in acetone all the time. You get these brushes, they're also put out by Gudbrod, and you can get them at any tackle shop. You generally buy a dozen of them. It's a whole lot easier to do. Now when you're mixing it, you want to take your time mixing. When you saw me use the epoxy, I just wound that up real quick. But you want to keep the bubbles down in your finish. Makes it a lot easier when you're putting it on the rod. Okay, now that we've got it mixed real thoroughly, like I said, I want to make a real light coat. So I have acetone in a little dropper bottle here. And I'm going to drop 10 drops of acetone in on top of the mixture and mix it again. Now this makes the coat real thin, and it doesn't quite harden like the other coats will. I use this only on the first coat, and then the next 2 or sometimes even 3 coats I'll use straight 1-to-1 flex coat finish. Again, you'll look inside and it's real clear now, so that means I've got a good mix. There's very few bubbles, so we'll start putting it on. Okay, I've got my area ready. I have to get my eyeballs down here so I can see. I like to have my light right over the top of my work when I'm doing this. It gives me a little light line right along the top edge so that I can see the imperfections as I'm working. I'm kind of a maniac when it comes to finish. What you're really trying to accomplish, of course, is just protect the threads, make it look as nice as possible. I'll show you all the little tricks that I use when I'm doing this. You want to go just about 1/8 of an inch over the edge. Smooth it out as much as possible. Put it off to the side so don't spill it all over the place. And then I take an alcohol flame and I just lightly run it along. Don't stay in any one spot too long. And that blows those bubbles right out of there. Changes the surface tension of the liquid, and the bubbles just come to the surface and pop. And I like alcohol more than a butane. I used to use a butane lighter. The problem with a butane lighter was if you got the flame too close to your wrapping, it would make a smoke line. You'd have a little charcoal on it. So I went to alcohol, and you don't have that problem. Now what I'm going to do is I've got my good glasses on here, and I'm going to look at it and make sure I got all the bubbles out, blow them out with my little gadget that I made. The places you'll find bubbles mostly will be on the ends, or in the case of a guide, you'll find it near the foot of the guide. Then after I've done that, I flame it one more time. This is just me personally. You don't have to do what I'm going to do now. But I've got the light line from the light shining down on the rod, and I can see a nice even light line. And I'm going to inspect all the way along the finish here, and I'm looking for little pieces of lint. There's one right there. Pick it out. Turn the rod some more, look down a little bit further. Now this is just getting into maniac perfectionism, but since this is my business, I really get into this. But for your personal rods, you just want to make sure that there isn't a big ball of cat fur laying on top of there. You want to get that off, but little pieces of lint, you don't need to worry about that much. Getting the bubbles out, though, I think is real important. I don't put the finish on all the rod at one time. Actually, I only do half the rod at a time, and I do one guide or one section of wrapping at a time. The reason is I want to get all the bubbles out as soon as possible. If they sit in there too long, then I start having a problem with getting them out. It just becomes more difficult. So if I do it right off the bat on each guide or each wrap, and now you can see the bubbles that I'm leaving in there just from turning the rod. That's why I mix up very small batches of finish too, because I only want to have enough finish to work with and have plenty of time before it starts to harden. And it starts to gel up a little bit, then it becomes hard to work with. Now you can see all them bubbles in there, and we're just going to make them disappear here. Again, the alcohol lamp, just walk it down. We want to get the flame just below the actual finish. If you actually touch it to the finish with alcohol, it's okay, but sometimes you can smoke it a little bit. It won't get smoky like butane, but you'll see the finish kind of evaporating on you. Okay. Again, I'm going to go down. Oh, I want to blow again first here. What this does sometimes is those bubbles that are a little tougher and deeper, you can push the finish out of the way to get to them. And where they show up mostly is where there's different changes in the layer of the thread. In this case, we have a design of a yellowtail, a silhouette of a yellowtail, and there could be some around the edges of it. Okay, we'll flame it one more time, make sure that we got everything. Also, when you flame it, what it does is it turns it liquid, and it makes it a much more even coat. You don't have as many lumps and valleys and rises in it. Now I take my time and go through and look for little pieces of lint. There's a couple right there. Pick one out. You need to keep turning it because it's going to take a while before this sets up enough that you can stop for any time. You see how this big lump is right here? That's because I stopped for too long. Looks like we've got all the little pieces of lint out. Now to smooth it again, I'll just flame it one more time. Make sure that I'm moving it. Don't let it sit in one spot for any length of time. We'll do one last piece here before we put it up in the rack to dry. Now since this is a two-part epoxy and it takes a while for it to set up completely, I have behind me a machine that slowly turns the rod. Not like a rod wrapper, it's actually kind of like a barbecue rotisserie. And that's what a lot of people will use just to do one rod at a time. Since I make my living doing this, I have to do 4 rods at a time. In fact, sometimes I wish I had a rack that would hold 8. But you don't need that elaborate piece of equipment. All you're trying to do is rotate the rod slowly, continuously for about, I'd say about 2 hours. Now you can get around that and not use a machine at all by putting very, very thin coats on. I mean, they have to be very thin. But I like to put it on a lot thicker, and it's easy to set one up with just your barbecue rotisserie. Take the rod and stick it in the end of the blank, tape it to the blank, and just support the other end of the rod, the long end of the rod, with some type of wood with a V in it, maybe with a little cloth in it to protect the blank from getting scratched. Now, this batch of finish is starting to get right near the end. It's hard to get these little bubbles out. There's really minute bubbles in that finish there. So I'm going to really take my time blowing them out. You want to take extra care to blow the finish out from underneath the feet of the guide. Sometimes just blowing on it will actually remove the bubbles. I may have to do this several times on this guide because the finish has thickened up quite a bit. Okay, now that I've checked all my wraps again, all the bubbles are out, all the lint's out, I'm ready to go put it in the rack. Like I said, it has to be turned for at least a couple of hours. This is a rack I've made for myself, holds 4 rods at a time. And I modified it. Instead of having a chuck type arrangement like I have on this bottom holder, I have gone to a piece of rubber just supported around a 2-inch PVC with a hole cut in the middle of it. And then you can just shove the rod back in there. Now I'm done. I can go have my lunch, my dinner, whatever, sit here and let it turn for several hours, then I'll inspect the rods afterwards, see how clean they are. If I need to do some touch-up work, maybe I'll do another guide or two. But basically, I want a slow-turning device to keep that finish nice and smooth all the way around. It's absolutely perfect to use your barbecue rotisserie. And that's basically all we have to do with building rods and putting finish on. We'll do a few other things and show you some fancy stuff on the rod. I don't want to do that right now, but I'll show you it done and on the rod so that you can see some of the active things you can put into thread on a fishing rod. Well, that pretty much wraps it up for the basics. Now we know how to build our custom fishing rod. I wanted to take a little time today to show you what you can look forward to if you want to take the time and really doll your rod up. This is the part that I have my most fun at. I have behind me a lot of designs that can be made. Some of it's done weaving, some of it's done diamond wrapping. There are books out on this that'll help you learn how to do it, but the best is when you design it yourself. And most of this stuff I've done myself. This rod here I built for Brooks Morris, owner of Area Rule, maker of doorknobs. It's a gift that he's going to give to someone that he fishes with in Hawaii. It's a beautiful fishing rod, IGFA class, 80 pound. Underneath the stripper guide, I have a black and gold chevron pattern that's closed out. Black and gold roller guides, all black and gold wraps with metallic gold trim and inlays. A little further up the rod here is a weaving design, and it's a jumping marlin with a dark blue background and bill, tail, and a metallic gold belly. That's a multiple layer weave. It's very difficult to do. We haven't had time to show you any of this on this tape. Maybe on the next time we'll be able to, next tape we'll be able to sit down and show you how to make your own patterns, how to set up these weaves, and do some really decorative stuff on your fishing rod. Doesn't make you catch any more fish, but it really helps you have a lot of pride in your equipment. This rod here is one that's been pretty famous at the Fred Hall show every year. It's what I call my $1,000 tuna stick. It's a regular tuna stick, 655 TSS CalStar, black and gold roller guides with my tuna guide system. And on each side of each guide, all the way down the rod, is a different type of tuna ending up in a colored yellowfin tuna, multiple layer, again weaving. And then the other weaves are all done in metallic gold. I start off with a bonita, albacore, bluefin, big eye, and finish up with a yellowfin tuna. There's 89 hours worth of just wrapping fish alone in this rod, and it's my personal pride and joy. I hope that today we've been able to teach you something about rod building. I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. It's not rocket scientist stuff, but it's a lot of fun. You get a lot of personal satisfaction when you can build your own piece of equipment, share it with your family, go out fishing, catch something on it. And I want you all to go out and build something, take your kids fishing, take your wife fishing, have a good time. Thank you.